Hello and welcome to today's conversation. I'm Joan O'Connor. I'm the Head of Leadership Practice at 1080. Today our conversation is the first in a series of 5 that we'll be having based on our recent research and our most recent white paper, where we identified 5 themes that are important for leaders in today's business world. Our paper is called From Human Focused to and Beyond Leadership. And today we're looking at the theme of holistic and systemic leadership. And I'm delighted to be joined by John Dore. I will ask John to introduce himself in just a second. But to get us started on John, John is an award-winning author, speaker, and educator. His book, Glue, which you can see behind him right now, it won the 2024 Business Book of the Year for Leadership. So welcome to this conversation, John. I'm very much looking forward to it. First of all, what else would you like to say about you to our audience?
I don't know. Well, thank you so much for the early plug for the book. I try not to mention that too much. But yeah, the book was sort of born out of sort of my little career journey. So I spent 20 years working in the city, worked for various different large international businesses there. I got a chance to work around the world. But for the last 10 years, I've been spending most of my time working at London Business School. We have one of the world's leading business schools on our doorstep here in London. And I get an opportunity to run a program there called the SEP. And that sort of is a joy for me. We'd literally bring thousands of leaders from hundreds of countries, from dozens of different organizations to London every year. I get to work with them. And this gives me a great insight into maybe some of the issues we might touch upon today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And that's really what we'd love to hear from you today, is those insights you have in working with these different types of leaders across different sectors, etc. So in our trait, our behavior, the holistic and systemic leader, 2 things came through. One, which is about a behavior of systemic thinking for organizational resilience. And what we're talking about here is about how everything connects and how that helps make decisions and strengthens the whole system. So there was that particular trait that came through. And also the other one was about prioritizing organizational health, which is about creating workplace cultures that are adaptable, resilient, and aligned with long-term success. And certainly as I was looking at your book, John, I could see some connections in terms of what you're talking about and what we were finding through our research. To get us started, though, is this idea of holistic and systemic leadership. To what extent are you seeing it with those leaders that you are connecting with and working with?
Yeah, so I think you say something quite intriguing from the off there, just about the nature of leadership today. So you use that word resilience. I think one of the personal qualities of leaders I see now is just this absolute requirement for resilience. I don't think it's been ever more difficult to be a leader. The requirements of not just doing things right, but doing the right thing, I think is an onus upon leaders today. And I often describe it as sort of spinning plates. I don't know if that sort of marries for you, just this idea that we ask more and more of our leaders all along, and they're valued and they're judged and they're often promoted and rewarded on their ability just to keep everything going, just to keep the organizational cogs going, and hopefully not to smash any plates in the process. So I think it puts a great onus of responsibility on the leaders. Now, the leaders who are good at that, I think they have personal resilience, but I think you're right. They also see the bigger picture, and they also sort of develop some particular skills, which I think are really needed now. One I call navigation skills. So they understand the nature of the organization essentially as a matrix, however big it is or however well organized it is or structured. Organizations have changed a lot in the last few years. They're hybrid organizations, people work differently. They're blended organizations, not necessarily everybody works for you or for the organization. And then there are also matrix organizations made up of different businesses and functions and regions and customer segments. And if you're a leader, you've got to navigate that complex matrix. So I think you need the resilience, but I think you also need to understand the nature of that complexity. And those leaders who are best able to navigate it seem to be the ones I meet who succeed most.
And those that you are talking to who are navigating it, what are they saying to you about what enables them to do that? And also what stops them?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we do in our program, we've sort of changed it a lot. I've been working on with this group for about 10 years now. One of the things we've changed is the nature of the way we run our programs now. So we put a greater emphasis on well-being, on wellness, on health and fitness, on rest, on recovery, on sleep, on diet, and all those things, which maybe 10 years ago we didn't pay as much attention to. So I think we help the leaders on resilience there. We also talk about these systematic issues. We talk about these issues of influence within complex organizations. We talk about the behavioral and psychological clues and cues you can use to navigate this sort of complexity. So I think we sort of talk about you as a human being and how your ability to do that, but also you as understanding your leadership role as a factor in that organizational success, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, and that's fantastic that you're doing that with the people who are coming on the program. If we think about organizations as entities, those leaders go back into their organizations. What will it take for organizations to take that focus in the way that they think and the way they behave and the practices that they have?
Okay, so I have a view on this, and
let's hear it. That'll be great.
To the one in your white paper. So I don't think organizations do anything. I don't think the organization doesn't do anything. I think individual leaders do. Individual CEOs, heads of department, functional leaders. I think they create these systematic processes and approaches to work which create better results. In the book we called it this idea of glue, but it's essentially around leaders seeing the organization itself as an inherent resource. And it comes from an idea called social capital. So leaders see not their role necessarily as being about them. In fact, pretty much every business book you read about leadership is about you. It's about you as a leader, your behaviors. Now, the view that sort of, this gentleman, Samantha Ghoshal, had, and this idea of social capital was it's not about you, it's about them. It's about how you harness them, how you harness the skills, the experience, the behaviors, the idiosyncrasies of the organization around you. So individual leaders can make a huge impact by harnessing all of that. In the book, it's called Galvanizing. How do you go about galvanizing the organization so you get more from it? So as I said, it's not the organization that becomes more holistic or systemic. It's leadership behavior that harnesses what you need to do to make it successful.
And that's fantastic. And I completely agree with you. I mean, ultimately, organizations are people at the end of the day. So if we take that idea of leaders have to galvanize, again, I'm interested in your perspective, what will help them galvanize and make it happen within their organization? Because as we know, there can be a lot of roadblocks to do this. There's the whole piece about short-termism, the pressure to deliver fake profits, etc. And this is such an important part of leadership and organizational success and health, I think. So back to my question, what do you see that enables those leaders who do it to do it?
Well, I think there are different qualities needed. I mean, one of the ironies is most organizations in their leadership training and sort of belief system around leaders is leaders should be great communicators. They should be able to tell a story, articulate a vision. They should be able to walk the floors on platform, in town halls, online, sort of sell a vision to an organization as the way to lead it forward. That's sort of the received wisdom. And I think it takes up a large amount of leadership time. It's certainly things engagement surveys often measure. Are your leaders good communicators? I think the secret sauce and the secret superpower is not communicating outwards. It's listening. So what we found when we did the research on this, there's just dozens of stories of leaders have been identified who leaned into this leadership superpower called listening. They're very aware of what's going on in the organization, what the rhythm and the heartbeat of the place were, what the stories, what the hopes, the concerns. They were tuned into that. There's a great story about Jeremy Darroch at Sky TV. I think at one time he was probably the highest paid executive in Europe. He's a very, very senior figure, but he took time out from his role to regularly listen. And he tells a story where he went to a call center. He went to the fringes of the organization in a sense, not the place somebody in head office would normally be. But he got some feedback there, and somebody in the call center said to him, Jeremy, you're never happy. You got this feedback. What do you mean we're never happy? He says, you've always got this change program, this initiative, this re-engineering thing that's going on. You're never happy. Anyway, Jeremy took this to heart. He took it back to his top team, his C-suite, and even to his board. And he took that feedback and they thought about this. Maybe it's not about change all the time. Maybe it's not about what's wrong and what's fixed, what needs fixing and what's broken. Maybe it's about just, helping people to believe that they can make it better. And they came up with this idea of believing better. They rolled that out as an internal program, and eventually it became the brand for the whole organization. They're an organization that believes in better. And that came from a moment of listening. It came from a moment of acuity on his part, where he tuned into something that made them realize you can press people and you can chase them, but if you get them to believe in what you're doing, you get more from them.
Thanks. And you absolutely, that piece about listening, and then there is that piece about what one does when one has listened. You just mentioned acuity, and I know you do have a view on this. So from a leadership point of view, what would you like to share with us about the importance of acuity and what it means for you?
Yeah, it's a great word. I mean, it's worth Googling or chat GPTing or whatever you want to. Acuity is about this acuteness of perception. There's so much noise today. There are so many media streams, social media distractions. There's so many things going on in the world. We're online. We're plugged in 24 hours a day. And leaders who can see through that noise, leaders can see what's really important, tune into what's really going to make a difference. That's a real art. That's a real skill. So it's not about knowing everything. It's about being able to measure and judge what's important. And if you can do that and you can be seen to be somebody who does that in an organization, it's enormously powerful.
And if we link that back to the story that you were just telling us, it sounds like Jeremy did know what to pay attention to. He did know what was important.
Yeah, he can I just say he's really open about this, that he wasn't good at this. He was a numbers guy. He was the finance director. He came out of corporate finance, which is about structuring the organization in value terms, and he had to change his own approach to tune into a more of a people-focused, a human-focused way of managing the business when he became the CEO. And I think he got more out of the organization and more out of himself by retuning in that way.
So from what you know about that and how he did it, how did he do that? How did he retune himself?
Yeah, I think some of these are, you use the word systematic, they're systematic leadership behaviors. It's planned in the diary, it's scheduled. These listening things are exercises which, he role models and then other people do, and then he hears more insights which are more valuable to him. I think he's quite open about, not always being good at it. So he tells another story about when they bid for some rights for the European Champions League, and he got it wrong. Again, it's not a plug for the book, but the story's in the book. So this acuity and this listening, I think, is a superpower. You can't have it all every day of the week, otherwise we'd all be infallible. And as you know, no leader's infallible.
Indeed, absolutely. Michael has asked, is acuity the ability to see the wood from the trees?
Yeah, I think it is that. I think it is. I think it's a discernment, and I think it's also a filtering. It's a discernment and filtering. If you think of what's been going on, say, geopolitically in the last few months, particularly around trade, around borders, around the way the world of business works. If you jumped at every moment of that, if you leapt one way or the other at every second of that, I think organizations become fragile and become nervous. So those leaders who are able to sort of keep hold of some guiding principles or some North Star or some sense of purpose, that's enormously important. I think over time, that'll override these sort of these seismic shocks and these bombs that go off every day.
Okay, Michael's asked a follow-up question. Isn't storytelling also a superpower?
I think it is. I think again, I think the storytelling I've seen most powerful from a leadership perspective is not necessarily the brand story or the organizational story, but is maybe a little bit more openness on leaders' part about themselves. I think you might have seen this trend more recently, some of the appointments for CEOs in some of the biggest firms. They're identifiable people who've got a story and a life and a backstory and foibles and everything else, rather than a corporate animal. So I think being able to tell your own story about where you're from, I always use, when I speak to audiences, I start with a line, I'm from Yorkshire, and that explains a whole realm of things to people that they intuitively know about somebody who's a man from Yorkshire, about the way I am and who I am. But where you're from is part of who you are, and part of who you are is probably one of your muscles you should best exercise as a leader.
So what you're saying to people is make sure you are telling your own story, not just the corporate story that exists. Connect to that human level. Yeah,
people are a lot smarter than we think they are.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things you've mentioned to me before is about the unusual leader. And I'd love you to say a little bit more about what you mean by that, and what makes them successful.
Yeah, it's an idea that's got a long heritage, so it's not mine. I think, Goffey and Jones wrote a famous book about 20 years ago about why should anybody be led by you, and they said you should lead into your authentic true self, quirks and all. You should do that, and you shouldn't try and hide that. I think that debate's moved on. They now talk about adaptive authenticity, of a way of sort of being yourself with skill. The idea I've been working on for the last 2 years, though, is you need to take that and tune it up to 11. You need to take that and tune it up more than you did in the past. Why do you have to do that? Because a lot of our communications and our interface with one another is intermediated by a screen. It's distant, it's hybrid, it's over the phone, online, on Zoom, on Teams, it's in hybrid meetings. It's done in a way in which there's an intermediation of technology. Or the visibility of leaders. Leaders aren't often always visible, even if they're in the office, they're in meetings, or they're in Zoom calls outside. So the visibility of leaders has changed. So how do we get to know our leaders? So I think if for a leader, part of the skill is being to tune up the unusual side of yourself. What is it about you that's different, that's unusual, that stands out? Now, this isn't about running into the office and doing cartwheels across the office and playing the bagpipes. It's not about doing something crazy. And I mean, you can do that if that's your thing.
And it would be really great if people did run in and play the bagpipes. I would personally be very happy if they did.
Yeah, people would sit up and notice, and maybe they'd share it online and be the 15 seconds of nanosecond fame. But what I'm trying to say is it's about these small deviations from the norm. It's these small things, these quirky things about you that if you lean into, people notice. If you're a leader, you're on show all the time. One of the stories I tell in the book, it's probably somebody you've come across, and certainly I think it's somebody that your colleague Michael would know. I mean, I worked for John Varley at Barclays about 15 years ago. He was the CEO, he was a CFO, he became the CEO of the organization. And he just did, he was a city gent. He was a pinstripe guy, striped guy, he wore the tie. He would go to Ascot. He was clubbable. He was a very, very, identifiable city banker. But he did something when we moved into a new head office. Once a fortnight or once a month, he'd do all-comers table tennis. We had a table tennis table set up in the lobby of the building. A couple of thousand people work in the building. Anybody who turned up could take on John at table tennis, or a really strange thing to do. Two things about it. Nobody knew he was an ace table tennis player. He's really, really good. And B, you got to see the guy for 40 minutes or an hour once every now and again, with his sleeves rolled up and a little bit of heat under the collar and a flashy backhand. So the corporate guy on the 31st floor, who nobody really knew, you only got a glimpse, but the glimpse you get wasn't the town hall set piece, wasn't PowerPoint. It was this guy who just had this wonderful way of being human just for a minute or two.
And with that, what he would get is that seeing the people within the organization away from their desks. So he was getting a more holistic view of them, if we bring it back to this concept that we found. And certainly one of the things coming through in our research, if we use this term of the unusual leader, is that in business world today, those that do look beyond, those that do look to check out what is happening beyond my department, my organization, how is society impacting on our business and the work we do, Those
Yeah.
people do seem to be a little unusual at the moment. So I'm wondering what thoughts you've got around that.
Well, one thing you've got on that insight, which I think is dynamite, and I think everybody should tune into. I mean, and it's verified by research. We can share it online afterwards, but there was some research done about 12 years ago by two professors called Sull and a former colleague of mine, Rebecca Homkes. They said what you've got to do is, if you're going to be a successful leader, you have to identify those other distributed leaders within the organization. They don't necessarily work for you. They're not necessarily in your line of report. They're not necessarily in your business area or division, but they're the levers that get things done in an organization. You have to think about working across and down through the organization. And they're rather horribly called in a lot of management literature middle managers. That they're not middle managers. They're the people that your customers and most of the people who work for your organization see as leaders. And if you can tune into who are these distributed leaders, get more from them, get connected with them, and really powerfully, if you've got the time and energy to do it, connect them with one another, then that's enormously powerful. And some of these systematic issues around bureaucracy and hierarchy and silos and all those other things, often they're not going to be solved at an organizational level, but they can be solved in those interpersonal connections between what I call the most valuable people in your organization, these distributed leaders.
Great. And I think that's that intentional leadership piece, isn't it? About being willing to do that, to take the time to recognize the benefit and the importance that can have, and the effects it can have.
Yeah. I mean, I say, you got all these plates, you can't spin them all. I saw an article the other day on LinkedIn, hugely entertaining, 113 qualities of the modern leader. I got to number 3 or 4, and I literally put my coat on and left the building. You cannot do all of these things. So what I've been arguing is you've got to lean into the things which are going to have the greatest impact. They're not necessarily organizationally the most important things, but they're the most impactful things. And the most impactful things are, how do you cohere and how do you collaborate and how do you bring together others? Because the individual leader, the individual contributor, the remote person at the top of the organization is absolutely, useless without the coordination and collaboration of that resource. And that takes a real human touch, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of, I love your phrase, a lot of intent. I can hardly even say it. You've got to be intentional about it. You've got to be intentional about it. Every day you come in, how can I connect and cohere others? How can I make that work?
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up on that, but I can also see there's another question that Michael is clearly on the ball today. What John says very much reminds me of Tom Peters' MBWA philosophy. Doesn't remote and hybrid working make this much more difficult? What are your views on this?
Yeah, I think I'm less well read on Tom Peters than Michael is. I think I get the idea. I think everything is more difficult in a hybrid world. We've sort of, in a way, convinced ourselves that it's a wonderful advantage. So if you think about the way we worked in 2019, I think there's 3 or 4% of people regularly work from home. If you wanted to work from home and you wrote to your human resources department, I'm pretty sure they'd say no, or some version of no that took a while to be told, but essentially it'd be no. I think during COVID, there was 70 or 80% of people working from home regularly. In the UK, it's now 44%. 44% of people regularly work from home apart from one another. And the Office of National Statistics produced a report on this last year, and apparently being apart has never been more popular. It's wonderfully popular. In fact, I think the number one thing they found on what are the downsides of working from home and remote working, the number one thing in their report which came back was there are no downsides. And I think that's wrong. I think we've become disconnected from one another, which has provided all sorts of health and well-being benefits. And certainly if you have as I do, a needy pet, it's a brilliant thing to be able to regularly work from home. But we've lost some of that glue. We've lost some of that connectivity. And surprisingly, Joan, this is a real surprise for me, we're not any happier. So if you look at the Global Engagement Survey Gallup does every year, if you look at the numbers from 2018, 2019, you look at those numbers compared today, people are less happy, people are less engaged, people are less motivated. And people feel that they've got less certainty than they had in the past, and they're more likely to want to leave the organization, and they're less likely to stay. So I think the benefit of this great liberalization of work has probably done two things. It's made the world of work even more complicated. The systematic nature of it is vastly more complicated, but it's also made the role of the leader a moral imperative, because nobody's going to connect and cohere that organization. It's not going to be done by AI or by some computer system or by some missive from head office. People are going to be cohered by the leadership behaviors of the people they like and respect.
Absolutely. And as you just said, actually makes the need for a leader to take this holistic view, to be taking a whole system view, to be paying attention to what is going on, and that connectivity, as I'm hearing it, it makes it even more important, is what we're hearing. Connecting the humans to each other is just so important.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to what I said at the beginning, if you don't mind. If you just come in with that slightly different mindset, that but I'll put it this way: often when you take a leadership perspective, it's about you as a human being who's got a slight deficit or something that can be improved. If you could just communicate better, or be a little bit sharper, a little bit smarter, it's those small incremental changes in yourself. Yeah, sure, they're going to make a difference. But if you change the mindset, it's not about those things. It's not about you, it's about them. What can you do to enable them with all their quirks and differences and idiosyncrasies? What can you do to cohere them? That's a completely different way of thinking about your role as a leader. I've mentioned it to one of your colleagues before. I've seen some wonderful examples of this. There are not many, which is one of the things why it's an interesting area. But if you get one of these bosses, who's good at cohering others, bringing them together, keeping them connected, knowing their backstory, knowing their family, not sending them a Teams message when they've done 25 years with a firm, but going and buying them a coffee or a beer, those sorts of leadership behaviors, I think, in a hybrid world are going to become more and more important, more and more rare, and because of that, really special.
Fantastic. So we're coming up to the end of our time for this session. Just to finish on what you were just saying there, you've talked about some of the capabilities that the leaders need to have. What else? What other capabilities would you suggest people need to have to take this approach that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's similar to that. It's the sort of G in glue. It's been called a million different things in different organizations, but it's essentially this one around how do you go about galvanizing others, and I think that's that's exhibited in a number of ways. I think one thing that leaders should have a really big think about nowadays is how much they personally involved in these organizational issues. And there's many plates to spin. But is recruitment the recruitment department's issue? Is learning and development the learning department's issue? Is succession planning and talent development the head of organizational development? No, I think if they become more and more of your concern as a leader, anything you can do to be involved in engaging people, recruiting people, mentoring people, getting to know people as they come through an organization, those will be the things you get noticed for. Those are the things which connect and cohere. It's exhausting, it's time consuming, you've got to drop a couple of other plates whilst doing it. But if you do those things that galvanize, I think that will have more of a holistic, systematic effect than an emissive ascent or new strategy or new way of trying to rationally organize. It's that personal human connectivity you bring that'll have a greater effect.
Fantastic. So just hearing some of those things you're saying, and I love the way you've said it's about them. So changing that mindset, it's not about you, it's about them. And therefore, what is it you have to do? And I notice right now I'm connecting with that idea of servant leadership as you say that, but it goes further.
And sorry, I don't mean them in like a pejorative sense or a secondary sense. It's the other way. Them is from your team, your people, your organization, your colleagues, your most valuable people. Them is the essence of it. It really is. It's not a sort of them, the people down the corridor.
Yeah.
Them is the whole reason you're a leader of the organization. And if you can't get more from those wonderful people, quirks and all, idiosyncrasies and all, and everything else. If you can't get more from them, you can't be more effective as a leader yourself.
Absolutely. And that, it's about them, the people. And I heard you talking about if you connect them and you galvanize them, you cohere them, then everybody will be able to connect into the system and then be able to think about how collectively they can make things happen within the organization.
And there's one other bonus to this. The really best the organization will want to work for you. If you do that, people find it really attractive. I saw it, when I was at HSBC for 10 years, quite a uniform, structured, methodical, almost military leadership structure they had there. But there was this, forgive me, it was this one guy. Everybody wanted to work for him because he just did something different. He didn't stay for very long, and he ended up being the CEO of another bank afterwards. But there was something that people found attractive about this glue-creating leader that I think is really compelling.
And I think that's a wonderful place for us to stop for this conversation. So thank you very much, John, for your time and for what you've shared with us. I found it very engaging and interesting. So I do really appreciate you doing that. Thank you, everybody who is here and listening. We will be holding our next one of these in September on courageous integrity. And you can see that will be on the 10th of September. So we look forward to welcoming you to that session. Please get in touch afterwards. If you have any questions at the 1080 on LinkedIn, you can come back to us, and we're always happy to answer any questions or comment on anything that you say afterwards. So please do get in contact. For now, though, we are finished. I wish you a very good rest of your day, whatever that is for you. Take care and be well. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you for your time.